Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome along to our webinar, Managing Long COVID and Vaccinations in the Workplace this morning. We're delighted to have you all with us, and actually it's one of our first webinars this year, even though we're into February. We've had the face-to-face event before we've actually had the webinar. Whoever thought we'd see that to this year as well, but delighted to have you all along today. Just a couple of quick house rules before we get going. I just want to encourage you all to use the chat to ask questions, and feel free to enter questions in the chat as we go along. And at the end of the presentation today, we'll come to a Q&A session where you can, we'll use the questions that are in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we will come round you as well. Also, just for your information, we are recording the session today, and we're only going to record the presentation part of it, and we will turn the recording off when we reach the Q&A, so that you can feel free to talk and seek advice from Natalie. But I know Natalie will say a wee bit more on the advice part of it when it comes to her as well. But I just want to let's get going this morning. So I'm delighted to introduce Natalie O'Hare, who is our presenter this morning. And Natalie's from Beyond HR, and she is the founder and MD of Beyond HR, which is an HR consultancy business, and I think you've been doing that for 10 years. Did I read, Natalie, as well?
10 years in
10 years in your own business, yeah.
In the consultancy business, and 3 years in Beyond HR, so all good.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming along to do this for us today. Today, we're talking about a topic that is very relevant to most of us at the moment. This week, we saw a bit of easing of restrictions in terms of office working, and we're starting to see people come back to offices in a hybrid fashion. Certainly the government are sort of outlining their strategies around that at the moment. And I'm actually in the chamber today, and I know some of the team have been in this week as well. So we're all starting to go through that transition. I know some of us have been back for quite a while as well. But it couldn't be more topical, because we're all having to manage teams that are coming out of different ways of working for the last 2 years, and look at what the new normal will be. And I always say when I'm chatting to people, the new normal that we were maybe talking about 12 months ago during the pandemic is not the new normal that we're maybe facing today as we come out of it. But there's lots of policies around that, and I'm going to hand you straight over to Natalie to get on, who's going to talk a little bit about long COVID and the issues that can have for your employees and as an employer, and a little bit about vaccination policies in the workplace. So Natalie, over to you.
Great. I make no apologies this morning. I have lots of slides, but I want to give you just as much information as possible. I'll maybe just dance over some of them because there's a lot, but please, in terms of notes and stuff, we'll be able to get all the slides over to the chamber to get out to you today as well. Great topics, very controversial. We're talking to clients every day about them. We've been on this corona coaster, as we call it, of, I guess, helping business owners get to grips with furlough that changed 14 times. A lot of the times it was maybe a Friday night at 5 o'clock when we were all ready to relax and do something else, but lo and behold, there was another announcement and getting to grips over the weekend before we knew what we had to implement, etc. on Monday. So we've tried to get furlough, people getting them back to work, the hybrid working. We're now looking at managing long COVID and vaccinations. Who knows what will be next in the journey, but it's been great to help so many businesses out there who are trying to run a business in such extreme circumstance and pandemic without having to think about all of this yet, but have kind of an expert and someone on hand that they can bounce ideas off of, and that person can keep up to date for them. So I want to give you as much information as possible. Obviously, the caveat and the disclaimer is today's advice is just today's advice. Even last night, from the last time that I delivered this presentation, it's changed again. So I just want to be very clear that today's advice is purely just today's advice, forever changing. Get information at the particular time when you have the particular case, because it's all different. But delighted to be here for our first webinar of 2020 and the first webinar with the Glasgow Chamber. So yeah, that's us. I'll speak a wee bit more about the end about what Beyond HR do. But today I really want you to have some takeaways from managing long COVID and vaccinations. Alan said, there any questions? We'll probably cover those at the end, but I know what it's like when you're sitting during a presentation and you've got a burning question and you're like, oh, I want to ask it, so pop it in the chat. And just with the nature and what we're talking about, names, it could be a hypothetical question. As we said, the recording will be cut off at the question and answers so we can have a proper good chat, and if something is really quite sensitive, then feel free just to give us a call to discuss or get our details from the chamber. So we'll start, and as I said, I make no apologies for the number of slides. There are more things that I would love to go into great depth and detail with you, but if there's anything that you really want some more information on, then just please shout. So what we're covering today is what is long COVID. We probably are all slightly aware now what is, the symptoms, what employers should do to support employees experiencing long COVID. Is it a disability? How are tribunals likely to approach these cases? What happens if you don't make reasonable adjustments? The lovely, controversial, but very, I love getting my teeth into this, the vaccinations in the workplace in terms of all the things that we need to think about. And then, as we said, any questions and answers at the end. So for anybody that's just dropped in, we are recording the session. We'll cut it off at the question and answers, but please, as many questions, just pop those in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. So the definition of long COVID from the World Health Organization, we're looking at that 2 months, okay? So it's individuals with a probable, and we say probable because there was not a lot of testing done at the beginning. A lot of people have the feeling that they may have had COVID. The more we know about it, they, in their head, they've confirmed it, but they maybe just didn't have a lateral flow or a PCR being able to confirm that. Usually 3 months from the onset, with symptoms that last for at least 2 months and can't be explained by another diagnosis. So that's just the definition that we're probably quite aware of. Those long COVID symptoms that we're seeing in the workplaces, fatigue, headache, just generally feeling rubbish and unwell, breathlessness, cognitive symptoms like brain fog, confusion, memory loss, been hearing quite a lot of that persistent cough, gastric problems, palpitations, neurological symptoms, ringing in the ears, loss of feeling in the hands and feet. So these are things to be aware of. There are symptoms from long COVID where maybe people can't get out of bed in the morning, to people just generally feeling a bit naff. So it's the same as all symptoms and conditions. It's easy to say, oh, my grand's friend isn't experiencing that, but everyone will have all different symptoms and all different effects on their day-to-day life. Just live a stat, and it's really good to kind of see, but the general population has experienced mild symptoms of COVID, we're aware of that, but there will be 5 to 10% who develop long COVID. So that's 5 to 10% of your workforce potentially might have some kind of possible symptoms that we've seen on the last slide. And 20% of people will still have symptoms 5 weeks after the infection. So we're looking at the Office of National Statistics is estimating that probably will be around, this was in October last year, 1.2 million cases of long COVID across the UK. It's probably fair to say that we all at this stage know someone that has some long-term impact or long-term effects of long COVID, whether that's just that persistent cough or whether that's they're still off sick from work or they're having phase return, etc. Just generally where they are not back to proper fitness. So it's all about obviously working each case in its own merit, work very closely with occupational health, and these are just some of the possible adjustments that they're recommending. And work is good for people, and people don't, it's important to note as well that people don't have to be 100% fit to come back to work. That's probably something that everybody thinks, I need to be 100% to be back at work, but there may be things like phased return to work, altered start and finish times if people are particularly feeling really rubbish in the morning, then can we have a later start, shorter days off in between for those that are just fatigued and need a day maybe off in between to recover, altering people's workloads as well if they've got they're looking after a couple of departments, maybe making them have fewer tasks than normal, more time to complete tasks, need for more regular breaks throughout the day, any temporary changes to their tasks. They might be a really physical manual job, but actually to enable them to get back to work, they could maybe work from home and do some of the admin, for example. But what we would say is, as we said, each case on its own merit, and please seek professional advice just at every step of the way. Support might be seeing health care in terms of getting them back to work, or general fitness up. Possibly no lone working at this stage. You might need to seek some advice on that, but clear objectives, regular communication. People can improve. Remember, you might have put some things in place at the beginning, 4 weeks later, they might feel like a new person, and you don't have to have all of those possible support mechanisms in place. Working from home or the hybrid working model, which we're moving now towards, which is great, or equipment adjustments. But really for me, how is the employee feeling and what are their adjustments? So we all worry and concern ourselves with what's everyone recommending. There's no better person that can recommend what they need other than the employee themselves. So what do they feel? And also, what have any experts in terms of occupational health or their GP recommended? It's important. We're not GPs and we're not expected to be GPs, but we need to get that advice and support from the people that know and that can assist us to make the decisions. So don't bear this huge burden on your shoulder that you have to have all the medical answers and knowledge. We just would rely on other people telling us, the professionals and the experts, on what they see fit for the next steps. Key question, is it a disability? And as time goes on, actually, when we're looking at timescales and looking at the legal definition, so the disability, which a lot of people may or may not have seen, is the physical or mental impairment, and that substantial and long-term negative effect on a person's ability to do normal day-to-day activities. So the physical or mental impairment, the substantial and long-term effect could be and is defined as likely to last or has lasted 12 months. Okay, normal day-to-day activities, walking, getting out of bed, getting dressed, going to work, watching TV, or doing the school run, for example, all of these would be the definition of a disability. So is long COVID a disability? Of using thoughts out there, people are having different symptoms, different severity of symptoms, different duration of symptoms, and actually we're still learning about long COVID as well. So it's very hard at the moment to say whether it is. However, all of the trade unions recently have been looking at long COVID as a deemed disability to overcome this issue. So other deemed disabilities would be cancer, HIV, multiple sclerosis. So what this means is the previous definition that we looked at, we bypass that and we just say that it absolutely is a disability. So it would get all of the complexities away in terms of that legal test of likely to last more than 12 months or 12 months, substantial, long-term, normal day-to-day activities. So that's what the trade unions are calling for. However, if that is implemented, it will lead to arguments about where the boundary between COVID and long COVID lies. The safest advice that we can give you is deal with it like it is a disability, because it will be a lower risk. You act on the information, you act on the basis that they have, and you strive for making and focusing on those reasonable adjustments that you can make. Because even if it's not a disability, you need to be careful that your policies don't discriminate, don't disadvantage, or indirectly discriminate other protected characteristics. What we also need to think about that most people are forgetting is long COVID might not be a disability in itself, but an employee or an individual may have a pre-existing condition like asthma, and it's the combined effect of the long COVID and the asthma that therefore makes and has implications for it being a disability. Okay, when we talk about directly or indirectly disadvantaging other people, long COVID at the moment has been found to affect older people, ethnic minorities, and women more severely. If you, for example, have an indirect discrimination, might be where you ask everyone to return to the office. but there might be a group of women, for example, it's affecting women more severely, that can't come into the workplace early in the morning, etc. So you might find that you have disadvantaged those groups of people, not through choice, just the way, in terms of the indirect discrimination. And if you don't make reasonable adjustments, you don't look at support, you've got no sympathy, it's just get back to the office and go on with it. What's the risk is always the question. You're likely to face grievances, but ultimately tribunal claims. And for discrimination, these claims are uncapped. So there's no higher level, it's whatever the judge decides on the day. And there's also injury to feelings. So on top of an uncapped compensation claim, there could be another payment of between £900 to £45,000 in terms of compensation. So it's quite a vast amount. Obviously, that's the money side of things, but there's also the negative impact in terms of employee relations and social media these days, and everybody tells the world what's went wrong. We see, for example, at the moment, Brewdog in the media and all the negative things that have come from there. People are making a judgment and making their mind up based on social media, etc. So we just need to be careful. And it's difficult, obviously, in terms of how tribunals are going to approach long COVID at the moment, because there's no decided cases on it. We wait and see. We don't want to be a test case for any clients that we're advising. We don't want them to be the test case. But what we're looking at is it's very similar. Some of the symptoms are similar to post-viral fatigue, ME, and chronic fatigue syndrome. So there is a famous case, Chief Constable of Dumfries versus Galloway versus Adams. And this case was about a probationary police constable who was on night shift, suffering from ME. Now, between the hours of 2 and 4 in the morning, his ME deteriorated completely. He found it hard to walk, for example. He often needed a lift home. When he got home, he needed help to get undressed. So not ideal. He was working night shift, but a lot of the population work night shift. He was dismissed for capability, and it was an unfair dismissal. Had they looked at reasonable adjustments, had they done everything in terms of support, and was there any more that could have been done? So in terms of caution and looking at the way forward, the best approach would be, as we've said, to treat it potentially as a disability, to exhaust those reasonable adjustments, and take advice in terms of next steps. ACAS's view on long COVID, they've recently suggested a different approach. So they think you should look at as much information as possible and considering the reasonable adjustments. So again, forgetting about the legal definition of a disability, focus on the health, focus on getting advice, focusing on managing the absence and considering any reasonable adjustments. So don't get your head in a spin over it meeting the legal definition. That's a priority, rather than trying to find out, is it disability, is it not disability, and where we go from. So therefore, what should you be doing? So engaging with employees with long COVID, considering these reasonable adjustments and accommodations. What does the employee need? Is it reasonable? Can the business do it? Can it not do it? And then what next steps are they? Proactively managing absence. So paper files are still something that's happening out there, but have you moved online? Are you analysing your absence? Are you counting COVID-related absences in here? Are you getting advice? Educating line managers. In most circumstances, these will be the people dealing with the employees, having the conversations, doing the return to work interviews. We get a lot of feedback that managers hate doing them because they think that there's more things that they're not allowed to say than they are allowed to say, and they don't want to get the company into bother, they don't want to get themselves into bother, but actually there's more that you can say. So it might be educating your line managers to have those conversations when they're keeping in touch with employees, and actually just having that nice supportive conversation. taken advice every step of the way. We've looked at the money, we've looked at the consequences, we've looked at any potential claims from a tribunal. So take advice every step of the way, just to make sure you keep yourself right. Every case will be in its own merit, absolutely, and be mindful of those uncapped claims. So just get the advice to make sure that you don't end up at a tribunal when it maybe could have been avoidable. And I guess a definition of reasonable, which is often used in law. Your reasonable might be different to our reasonable. So we want to try and find out what that reasonable is and try and meet your needs, but obviously keep you safe. So for time-wise, we're great in terms of vaccinations. Our next topic in the workplace, we'll have time at the end, about 15-20 minutes for questions, because that's important. So again, quite a lot of slides on this. Very controversial topic. None of this, it's important to say, is my viewpoint. Everyone makes their own decision in terms of vaccinations. We're talking through bits and bobs that are coming through. Changes that are being made, what you need to consider, and the help and support that we're able to give you as well. So can employers make vaccinations compulsory? Every day we're still getting queries on this. Natalie, can we enforce vaccinations? And we'll talk about on that journey where we've came, where we are at the moment and where it's likely to go. Why forcing employees to be vaccinated could be an issue. And also what constitutes that philosophical belief, and what does that even mean with regards to vaccinations? So again, lots to think about. But where we are, love a stat again. This was a survey carried out by Brodie's on the 18th of May last year. Good just to see in terms of, this is from the employer perspective, what was going to happen, what their thoughts were. So 66% of respondents to recent surveys said that they plan to encourage staff to take the vaccine, and that word was encouraged, but some versions of encouragement are 50% of respondents indicated that they plan to consult with staff in relation to the introduction of a vaccine policy. For me, that figure is fairly low. That's only 1 in 3 businesses know that they have to consult. So we need to shout that that needs to happen more, particularly on an introduction to a vaccination policy. So for me, that figure is a wee bit lower than where it needs to be. 20% of respondents indicated that they plan to require staff to disclose their vaccination status. Now, lots of legislation around data protection. Again, another query that we get every day: can we ask people, can we log it in the system? Are they vaccinated? Are they not vaccinated? So there would 20% at that time. I'd love to maybe see what that figure is now also. And none of the respondents at the time indicated that they did plan for staff to be vaccinated. Again, I'd like to see where that's moved. So just interesting in terms of stats. Always good to see. And 40% of employees had expressed concern to their HR or line managers about being vaccinated. And that leads us on to our next in terms of from the employee perspective. Again, March 2021. Glassdoor, this was around 2,000 for this survey. This was around 2,000 UK employers that were asked for this. 56% of UK employees think workers should be required to take the vaccine before allowed back to the workplace. 68% of employees report to believe that social distancing and wearing masks should remain compulsory until everyone in the office has been vaccinated. 14% of employees said they would quit their job if they were forced to return to work before all staff had been vaccinated. 12% of employees surveyed said they don't intend to get vaccinated yet, but 1 in 4 revealed they would be more likely to take a vaccine if their employer incentivized them to do so. Now, there have been various throughout the pandemic. We've seen some organisations that have maybe provided a gym membership, extra days holiday, or monetary cash to encourage people in the workplace to get vaccinated. We've had some queries ourselves on it as well. So 12% of that, and then 1 in 4 more likely to if there was some kind of incentive introduced. And 39% of employees suggested that financial incentives such as the cash bonus would encourage them to take the jab. So all really interesting stats. And this is where it goes into in terms of a slight divide. So whether or not employers can make vaccinations compulsory, and only since the 31st of January has this again changed. So in Scotland, there are certainly no mandatory vaccinations as yet. It would require further legislation. Equality and Human Rights did come out and say that it could be reasonable, but it was only England at present. So the legislation was passed for England in terms of social and healthcare. So no other types of businesses. However, we do know in recent days, the last 3-4 days, the government are looking at a possible U-turn on this. So that would mean, and today, when I put my post out there saying today is really a key date, today is a key date for vaccinations, because if the 1st of April is still going ahead, today is the last day for vaccinations for those that are undecided in order to be fully vaccinated to comply with that legislation. So that's really key. And if there are those employees that are undecided, I guess the government's U-turn is really not helpful, because they don't know if it's going ahead or not. It's likely to be a 2-week period of consultation of whether it's required or not. Just for the background, obviously it was introduced when it was the Delta variant. The death rate obviously was extremely high, and it was out of control. But now the need for that is less, because it's Omicron, it has less dangerous effects, and vaccination uptake has been extremely high. So is it therefore still proportionate and justifiable? So that is where the government is coming in terms of, is it still a mandatory requirement? The estimate is around 88,000 people in England that haven't had the vaccination yet, and 88,000 people in April that would therefore have to be dismissed because they cannot meet that requirement. So it's a large amount of individuals that we're talking about on the front line. So we sit and we wait. And again, I've said that this webinar today has been a key date for that, because today is really that last date for people to go and get that vaccination in order to meet that deadline. So it's all, in summary, it's all up in the air. But in Scotland, we remain at the moment in terms of no mandatory vaccinations. But where does that go? And we sit and we wait, and our advice has to change based on any other future decisions that are made. If it's deemed essential, though, in terms of if you decide off your own back that you're having that as a mandatory requirement based on your industry, your sector, your requirement, the risk, the service users or the customers that you deal with, it must be in a COVID risk assessment, and you must have a written policy in place. You may have heard of the no jab, no job. So there are certain industries and certain companies that are saying, if you've got the jab, you're not getting a job. And that has not yet been tested. There are a certain company as well that's very strong on the no jab, no job, has been on telly, has been on the media, and actually has encouraged and will be helping pay for employees' vaccinations if it goes private, etc. So that that's how strongly they feel about people in the workplace being vaccinated. But as at the moment, there is no mandatory requirement, and it would be with caution that you would do this. And we have to remember, and I'm not here, as we said, to talk about opinions, but we need to be careful that vaccination might not be a choice for everybody as well. It's not suitable for everyone. So someone in your workplace might really want to get it, but they've been advised by their GP not to. Or they may have religious beliefs. They may not have it because of pregnancy, etc. Or at the time, they may have not been of the age to get the vaccination. So we need to be careful for those discrimination claims as well. And we need to be careful in terms of discrimination. And you need to think about all these different individuals in your workplace. And you probably have to cater for the fact that there will be at least one individual that won't be vaccinated in your workplace. And is that documented in your risk assessment as well? So all of your vaccination policy has to think about this. And if you are going down that mandatory vaccination requirement, it has to be proportionate means of achieving that legitimate aim. So what does that actually mean, Natalie, is what we're always asked. So that legitimate aim is probably the easier part of the legal test. It's about protecting employees, workers, your customers, your clients. It's about protection. It's all about the health and safety element. The proportionate part is the difficulty. Is it required? Is it with social distancing, with masks, with home working, with hybrid working, with Omicron variant, is it now proportionate? So that might be the harder part to get that as well, especially when you have so much other things still in place like masks, social distancing, all the stuff that we've talked about as well. And obviously get advice. If you're looking to put this out there, then please get advice. Any policy, if you don't, any policy that you have out there doesn't discriminate against those that maybe are unvaccinated in your workplace, not through choice or through choice as well, but what you're looking at as well. Okay, so lots to think about. Obviously your case will be less of a case where if you allow customers and clients on your premises that aren't vaccinated, but you're saying to your employees they must be vaccinated. So lots of different pitfalls and things to think about as well. And there may be individuals that say it's because of a philosophical belief. There are some employees that have a strongly held belief that vaccinations are harmful to public health. And will this amount to a protected belief? Again, we've got Granger versus Nicholson case. So this gentleman, it was what we need to look at. It's a protected belief, and it's a philosophical belief. It's not just an opinion. Okay, and it goes far. To keep it simple and away from all legal terminology, you can have an opinion, but you can also have a philosophical belief. So this claim, Mr. Nicholson was made redundant, and he brought a claim for religion or philosophical belief. So belief discrimination. He argued that his belief about climate change and the environment wasn't an opinion, but it was a philosophical belief. We'll go through the testing at the moment, but he said that his belief was influenced by the clothes he wore, how he travelled. He never travelled by plane. What he ate, what he bought, what he did with his food waste. He didn't travel by aeroplane. He didn't renovate his home. He tried to buy a local produce. He reduced his intake of meat and food waste, and he encouraged others publicly to reduce their carbon emissions. And he had a genuine fear for the human race. And he had how this translates. It could be that vaccinations are harmful to public health, and that's where it could be similar. So he was made redundant, but he was made redundant, and he said, I wasn't made redundant because there was a diminishing in work. I was made redundant because of my beliefs. So in order for that protected or that philosophical belief, it has to have that level of cogency, seriousness, and importance. It can't just be a thought. It has to be, this guy lived the life of having that view. This guy actually associated himself with people that held the same belief as him. So this wasn't just about, I've got a wee thought and this is what I think. If someone has a thought on the vaccination being harmful to public health, what do they choose? What do they do in life? What are their thoughts? How strongly are they held? How serious do they take it? Is it worthy in respect in a democratic society? Is it not incompatible with human dignity? And it doesn't conflict with the fundamental rights of others. That's all legal terminology. We would talk through any of that should that be the case. But there may be employees in your workplace that, as we said, it's not suitable for. Some people just don't agree with it, or there might be a strongly held belief that it is harmful to public health. All of these things you have to take into consideration. And have that vaccination policy in place. So in HR, we'd look up to the CIPD and we'd look up to ACAS. What are CIPD saying about it? They are saying that COVID vaccination increases throughout the UK. Employers must plan the implications for their staff, visitors and workplace as a whole, covering communication, risk assessment and vaccine policy. I'd love to do a poll right now, but I'm not going to, but the poll would ask the question, how many of you have drawn up a vaccination policy at the moment for your workplace? Okay, and we're not talking about having a mandatory policy, but we're talking about even having an encouragement policy. If we look at ACAS's guides, if an employer feels it's important for staff to be vaccinated, they should talk. They should recognise trade unions if they have them and decide what steps to take. And any decision after that should be put in writing, for example, in a workplace policy. So as I said, I'd love to do that poll. We don't have time, but how many have you thought about it, have asked for it, or are drawing it up in place, or have consulted and rolled out that vaccination policy as well? As we said, the alternative to doing that risk gung-ho approach of having mandatory vaccination policy would be the encouragement and the education and the acceptance that all circumstances, it might not be appropriate and there will be employees out there that are just unable to get it. Consult with employees or reps about putting the policy in place. How are you going to communicate this as well? And data protection implications, which we'll talk about later. How you're going to use the policy and reducing workplace conflict. There's been a lot of instances where there's been heated debates that have led to fisticuffs because people have strong beliefs about some of this stuff, and there can be a rift between vaccinated and unvaccinated staff, unfortunately, in your workplace. And what circumstances do you need to review the policy? For example, if private vaccination becomes possible, if you get maybe a lot more of the workplace deciding against, etc. So absolutely having that policy in place. Other issues to consider are human rights. There's HR legislation, employment legislation, but there's also a human right, a choice to have that vaccination, and that's important. Practical workplace issues as well. If we're getting people back to work and they're not vaccinated, are we okay to put them maybe in a less risk area or a less secure? But what happens when the employee says, no, I want to stay doing my job on the front line, I'm not getting vaccinated, and it's my right to do so? GDPR as well, question every day, can we ask people who are vaccinated? The short answer is no. It's sensitive personal data. We must be very careful. There might be some kind of form or situation where we have to ask the question, but it might be done in a different way rather than saying, Alan, are you vaccinated? Which is not what we would expect. We also need to be mindful of different roles, different sectors, different rules, different countries. I'm going to add in there as well, in terms of England, Scotland. If you've got sites in England and sites in Scotland, you'll have different rules. But also we need to tailor advice for different sectors, different roles within a business. Might be different for someone that's home-based in office, but you've got people on the front line as well. Okay. Lots of information, as I said. Anybody furiously taking notes, don't worry, you'll get the slides. But first piece of case law came last week. Amazing, we've got COVID case law. Normally we wait years for case law. They have managed to push it through. There's another 7 pieces of case law on COVID and getting people back to work and all the implications there. But this is solely on mandatory COVID vaccinations. It was in England at the time where vaccinations were legally allowed to be mandatory. Who knows where the case would go now? Who knows where the case would go in Scotland, where it's not? But this was the first case in a Sheffield care home of a care worker refusing to be vaccinated. And it was a fear dismissal, okay? She had a genuine fear. She was sceptical about the vaccine, and she thought it was more a conspiracy. She did not feel that the government were telling what people needed to know. She did not take any non-natural medications, so that's very important. That was against her beliefs. She didn't talk about her beliefs though until her disciplinary hearing when she was dismissed. There was calls because it was COVID times. At this particular time, there was around 1,500 COVID deaths per day in the UK. So that's quite important for context to know. She had 14 years service. It was a reasonable management instruction to ask her to be fully vaccinated. So that amounted to her breach of contract, and she was entitled to be summarily dismissed. But, there's always a but. Another employer, this is one particular case, remember, another employer could fall short in this, even if they do, if we pass the test of allowing mandatory vaccinations, if they didn't have the minutes, if they didn't look at reasonable timescales, if they had an incomplete investigation. So although there's always a fair reason for dismissal, a tribunal will always look at the process as well. Okay, so say for example, in Scotland, we ever get to the stage of mandatory vaccinations, it's not just a green light that we can go ahead and we can dismiss and it will always be fair. Great that this case law out there, great to look at, but we're in Scotland at the moment where we don't have that legislation. There's certain industries that it may be encouraged, but certainly there's no legislation in terms of having mandatory vaccination. So PS, yes, it is all up in the air. People in their brains are probably going, wow, at the moment, it's a minefield. It is a minefield. It's each case in its own merit. There's lots of different advice. The advice today, again, as we said, is only today's advice because it'll probably change again by tomorrow. But it's really good just for you guys to understand what's happening out there and where things might go in that one particular case, but we're all about process as well. So in summary, for vaccinations, be mindful of the risks, seek advice if you're looking for that mandatory. The less risky way might be that encouragement policy and education piece. There are risks of having that policy in place. There are no test cases as yet in Scotland on the subject. And would discrimination occur on the basis of having that philosophical belief, so that genuinely held serious belief of, for whatever reason, vaccinations aren't right? So mandatory versus encouragement policy, those two avenues to think about. So I speak really fast because I want to tell you as much information as possible. We've covered 2 topics in a short space of time, from managing long COVID and the risks there to vaccination in the workplace. And naturally, we're beyond HR. We help SMEs, startups and larger organisations in Scotland, England and Northern Ireland. And we provide on-site support and help. We chair meetings for you as well. We can give advice and mediation services. So I appreciate we've got great time for question. The recording will be stopped in a moment, so you're able to speak freely, which is fabulous. But for anybody that does want one-to-one advice, our details are on there, or just want a bit more information, or any of the HR services in general. But I would welcome any questions that you might have about long COVID or vaccinations. Any of the clinical questions I can't answer, I can only answer your HR questions, but I can certainly pass you to someone who might know. And please don't use any employees' names, etc., just for the sensitive nature. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Super. Well, thank you so much, Natalie.